Good evening, everyone. Before we start, I would just like to tell you guys to turn off your phones or keep them on silent, please. Well, my name is Eric Matero, and tonight I'm fortunate enough to be introducing both speakers. And first, I'm going to start off with Rosian Zerner. Rosian Zerner is a Holocaust survivor who has helped and advocated many organizations, such as the World Federation of Jewish Child Survivors of the Holocaust, and the Greater Boston Child Survivors, and the Jewish Family and Child Services. One thing to notice about Rosian Zerner is that when she escaped the Kappa ghetto, she was helped with her parents helped her escape, where they dug a hole under a fence, and she was pushed to safety. After that, she had to live a life of constant running away and hiding, where she met many of her rescuers that she deems as extraordinary for having the courage to protect her and save her because they believe in a better world. And so I will say to you that she does this not only as a personal responsibility that she has as being one of the last generations to have experienced the Holocaust, but that she does this out of gratitude for those that saved her and out of pure respect for the victims of the Holocaust. And so we also have a second speaker tonight who are here. And her name is Rebel Pfeiffer, and her mother's name is Pfeiffer. I think I got that wrong, I'm sorry guys. It was a pretty hard name to pronounce. So they recently found out that their grandfather and great-grandfather were perpetrators of the Nazi who helped wire the Auschwitz fence. And one of the things to notice about her is that tonight we will hear of their stories of how they felt when they found out about this. And so they will share to us their experience. So please welcome both of them with a big round of applause.
Well, Eric told my story, I can leave. Actually, Dr. Schimmel, faculty, students, Rosalie, Christine, all the new friends that I made tonight, I want to thank you for inviting me. And thank you for continuing to honor the rescuers with programs like this. It's important that the righteous get recognized and that the act of rescue has its due because it is an act of heroism that very few can do, unfortunately, because not that many participated during World War II as well. So just know that I'm here today as proof that miracles do happen. That I'm here today because there are individuals who rose to the occasion and became extraordinary from being ordinary because of their deeds, because they bucked the participation and cooperation of people who did nothing. And they were not that different from anybody that you can see walking down the street. One of my rescuers was a seamstress, another one was a journalist, another one was a farmer. It takes all kinds of people to come out and become extraordinary, because this is an act that is impossible to view as a random act. I mean, when you look back and know that if discovered, you will have your family killed, everything taken away, besides being murdered yourself, of course. And the Nazis were murdering pets as well as anything that was connected with a rescuer. So I have looked in my own heart to see if I could do that, and I owe to do that. But I just wonder if I have the moral fortitude, the courage, and what it takes to be a rescuer. I mean, I don't know, would you be able to do something like that? I mean, would you endanger your family, your everything around you for one life or two lives or three lives because it is the right thing to do? I'm not sure that you can answer that question so quickly. It needs some meditation, I guess. But it is something that you have to realize about yourself. How far will you go to stand up and be counted when a situation comes to your doorstep that requires you to decide between life and death? And looking around at the world today, you see so much of that going on, and perhaps it is something that many of us can, it's okay, I love babies. So, so that's something. So because of what happened to me, I now live my life in gratitude. I mean, I don't know how to live in gratitude to fully thank my rescuers. How do you thank for a second chance in life? How do you thank for the total devotion and sacrifices that these people have made for me? I don't know how I could ever repay them, although after the war we certainly tried to do that for my rescuers. And this has also taught me to be grateful for the challenges in life, for a beautiful sunset, or the love, being loved, or giving love, or the freedoms that the United States has provided in my life. And for being able to have continuity through my children and my grandchildren. And that shows that we're here to stay. So my rescuers were ordinary beings, and they were individuals without whom I and many others would not have survived. They did it simply because they thought it was right. There were others who did it for money. There were others who couldn't continue to do that and betrayed the people that were in their care. And there were others who just did it as a lark, but then realized the seriousness of what is to happen. And then they became either participants in saving a life or in destroying one, which is a difficult decision as well. Being a rescuer was also something that was regarded as a liability after the war, because when their neighbors turned on them just because they didn't agree with what they did, because so many were involved in being collaborators. Okay, my story was such that my first rescuers were really my parents. We were interned in the Kovno ghetto, which is a place in Kaunas, Lithuania. It was the capital at that time. I was born into a privileged family. We had servant, chauffeur, nanny, whatever. And then one day we had nothing. We were in a one-room place with 5 of us, and no sanitation, of course, and one of the coldest winters in Lithuanian history. I mean, we pick up a glass of water and it would freeze. We have to drink it really fast before we got into our bottle that time. My mother, who had been a concert pianist who studied in Paris, I remember her peeling these frozen potatoes with her musician hands, which also got frozen. And she totally was, her personality changed completely with what was facing her. But she became a hero also. My father, who had been a businessman, he was a lieutenant in the army, he was an attorney, he couldn't practice because neither the Russians wouldn't let him either. He was able to get a position in working outside, and one of the Germans that were assigned to that company actually helped saving him from the ghetto. He took the truck and drove him outside. Well, the communal ghetto itself was a ghetto at first, but then it became a concentration camp because it was one of the earliest that was founded because it was at the beginning of the war. It actually was a model for some of the other camps. And did you know there are like 42,000 camps that were there during the war? It's totally astounding that that figure is possible, but of course every village practically had their own. It's something that is unfathomable. So when it became a concentration camp, they started killing. The Nazis ruled us either through fear or through deceit or through cruelty. And they kept doing promises, oh, this shall be passed, this is just a one-day thing, or we have to follow orders. But then we realized this is for keeps. And they had something called the Grosse Aktion, which is it was a large gathering of people where, I don't know, some of you might have seen some movies where you take one side to the left or one side to the right, and one is going to live and the other one is going to die, and these are all human beings. So Lithuania had about 280,000 people that were Jewish before the war. It was a center of learning. It was, it's actually a funky little country. It has like 6,000 lakes. It has the oldest university in Europe. It has, it says it's the center of Europe, loves basketball, beat the United States in basketball. And they have a statue of Frank Zappa in the middle of their capital. You figure that one out, you know. But they were collaborators. Even before the Anschluss, before the Nazis came, they brutally murdered Jews wherever they could and take their possessions. They would gather them in a garage and take hoses with water and put them in their mouths and blow people up. They would chop heads off and torture people. My grandfather was murdered even before the ghetto was founded because they wanted his possessions. My elderly grandmother was absent-minded, was denounced by a neighbor because she was standing in a bread line without wearing the yellow star that everybody was required to do. And we were all in that ghetto. So the Grosse Aktion murdered 10,000 Jews in less than a week. We could hear the shots, the cries, they were not too far. And my parents decided that I had to leave, that they would risk their lives so that I would live. So what they did is they dug a hole under the barbed wire that surrounded the ghetto. They timed the guards, the dogs, and the flashing lights. And they dug a hole painstakingly, slowly, because that it's not something you do in one day. And one day it actually happened. They were able to time the flashing lights and the changing of the guard and the dogs and everything, and they pushed me through that hole. And on the other side of that hole was my father's secretary, and we ran across the Yamuna River before we could do anything else, and I was on the other side of the barbed wire, and I didn't know what was happening to me, and I cried so very, very much all the time, and the secretary decided she couldn't keep me any longer because it was too dangerous. However, some other rescuers came to my rescue. They were two wonderful friends. There were two Christian scientists who were also endangered by the regime because of their religion. But my mother's best friend was a journalist, and they were journalists with her, and they formed a network where we could actually stay there with them until we were discovered, because we lived in a two-family home, and the other side of the family was occupied by the brother of one of those two sisters, and he was a rabid Nazi. So if he was discovered, it would have, if he knew that there was children living in that place next door, it would have been death for all of us, not just me. And I developed whooping cough. So that's another miracle in my life. They did a Christian Science healing on me, and I stopped the coughing, and we all survived that one too. So then they started being suspicious, though. The two sisters were buying far too much food because there were so many more people living there, and it was very close quarters, and we couldn't really talk except for that whooping cough. we were very, very quiet. So they decided I had to move on, and fortunately there was a sister that owned a farm of one of the two. Her name was Lita. She was my main rescuer. She she rescued a deaf mute. She rescued a widowed person from Russian descent with several children who could have been deported. She rescued other Jewish children, and after the war she was sent to Siberia because she was a landowner. That was the Russian side of it. I also had another rescuer whose name was Helene. She was a German who was married to a Jew, and whose daughter was killed almost immediately because she was one of the flower children who was coming to the soldiers and saying, don't do this, it's evil. And they put her to death for doing that. And of course the husband, who was Jewish, was also killed, although they hadn't started doing the Mishling yet, which was the mixed family thing yet. So Helene decided she would chase children, and I was the lucky one that could stay with her for a while. She saved another child, and then when the Russians came, she had to flee because she was a German. When she went to Germany, she wrote a book. It's called Das Kind soll leben, and it's a story of her rescuing the two children, me and some others, but also some very interesting stories about the Lithuanian occupation time. That particular book got a very prestigious prize in Germany. It's called the Geschwister Scholl Prize. And there are other books that were written about my uncle, who was murdered in Lithuania, who was a half-Jew, and there's a lot of things that each life reads like it should be a tragic novel, but it's real life. 40 members of my family were murdered by the Nazis. And I am still wondering, like, what if all these people who could contribute so much to society, who had brothers and sisters and cousins, and they were just suddenly left the earth, mostly within 1 year. Most of the Lithuanian Jews were murdered. Lithuania is one of the countries that has the highest proportion of Jews murdered to their population. About 4% survived. You're looking at a 4% person here. And another miracle is that my family, my mother and my father also survived, which is totally a miracle when so many families were killed. We were an intact family when only 4% survived. So that was, miracles follow me, and I'm forever grateful for that, and I hope it continues. And just, at this point, let me ask you a question. How many of you have been touched by the Holocaust? Do you know about the Holocaust? Do you know somebody who was involved in the Holocaust? Could you raise your hand? Really? I'm even surprised, because not too many, but most people, it's history. It isn't for real. It's something that you read about, and you agree, disagree, and it's to some people it's totally surreal. They don't want to face it. And to some people it is something that they prefer not to face because there is a past connected to that. And we live in a society now where there are governments, people, organizations who say it never happened. There's like, in Iran, for instance, the government has cartoon fests about the denying the Holocaust. And they get prizes for it. There are people in the United States, when you read the conspiracy theories or anything else, it's like, how can they say that? I'm alive, I was there. Yeah. And that 15% of America at this point is anti-Semitic. That in England, in 2015, there were 62% were anti-Semitic. In 1916, it went up to 75%. And their majority leader, Corbyn, is friends with Hamas and with Hezbollah. So, let's say in Germany, the incidence of anti-Semitic incidents went from 1915, I'm still living in the 19th century, in 2015 were 162, I believe. In 2015, in 2016, they were 468. So the increase is huge. And why is this happening? Haven't we learned the lessons that the Holocaust can teach us? I don't know. I don't understand. Since then, there have been other genocides, like in Rwanda, and still happening in Darfur, Kosovo. However, the Holocaust could have been a lesson for everybody. Stop doing that. It's suicidal. It's first the Jews, and then who else? Hitler was going to kill all the Poles. He was going to kill the Germans because they didn't deserve to live if they lost the war. There's the twisted thinking, the twisted actions, but one has to be careful because words of violence lead to violence, and we live in a violent society. and your neighbor can turn to be the one. So this is the time for action and not for inaction. As it's one thing to be a bystander, you can do that, but it's not contributing to either your persona or to society. I have a whole bunch of quotes in my notes here that I haven't looked at, and my speech is still in my computer, so I do have some that I would like to read to you though at this point. One is by, let's see, where can I find it here? Well, one is by Elie Wiesel that I know. The opposite of love is not hate, it's indifference. And when you think about that, it's a huge philosophical as well as a personal thing that you can face. And there's Kucinich who said, look at the other as if it were yourself. How would you be acting then? You know that the Mayas have a greeting in Lakesh that is, I'm you, you are me. I'm inside of you, you're inside of me. And how would we act if everybody had that outlook on life where we respected the individuality of each as we respect our own, and what happens now in the world is, I do not understand. I do not understand how that is possible, that there's so much cruelty and so much violence happening. But you know, it doesn't have to be so, because in each and every one of us, there's that spark that can kindle the best in us. Mother Teresa said, if there's a drop in, and I'm paraphrasing, if there's a drop of water in the water, that drop can create ripples. And those ripples can go on and on and on. They can go into perpetuity in the sea. They can go into ourselves, into our memories. They can go into our children, into our children's children. And they can be there. And every one of you can make a difference. There's so many youthful faces here. You're our future. You're the ones who can do it if you want to make a better world around you. And when you go home today and you talk to your friends, families, anybody, tell them that there is a better way, that everybody can contribute to make this a better world. And I'll probably leave you with a word that is the most spoken word in the Hebrew language. It's shalom. It means peace. Peace like in the world and in our hearts. Thank you very much for being here.
So at this point, please, if you have a question for Rosian, raise your hand, ask. She has a microphone. She will repeat your question so that everybody can hear. Who would like to start us off? Who has the first question? Yes, go ahead, please.
42,000 camps.
I can't hear you.
The 42,000 camps you talked about, are they all active in Theta or
The 42,000 camps are
they have only
in Europe.
in Europe?
In Europe, yes.
The question.
The question was that whether the 42,000 camps were in Europe, but Europe was so mixed up at that point. And this is an official number from the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum in Washington, where all my memorabilia is there now. But there's also another figure that I wanted to put out to you. There is a place in Israel called Yad Vashem. It has many purposes, but one of them is to recognize the rescuers. And all of my rescuers have been recognized there. but the total number of rescuers so far recognized are 24,280 minus few or plus few. And that shows you that there are two things. One is that the survivors are as grateful as I am for what has been done for them. And two is that that number can be staggeringly high or staggeringly low, depending on how you want to look at it. So thank you for the question. Yeah.
How nerve-wracking was it to go across the fence?
Can you repeat the question to
Yeah.
me?
The question is, how nerve-wracking was it to go across that fence? How nerve-wracking was it?
Oh, I didn't know what was happening to me. I was 6 years old. Can you think back on how you were at 6 years? I mean, what were you doing when you were 6 years old, right? Yeah, I just didn't know what was happening to me. Suddenly, I was not with my parents. I was doing this crazy thing, going under a wire, and going to see this person I hardly knew in the shadows and running off with her. You know, it was like, this is not reality. So, yeah. But it's still with me today.
Really?
You seem so positive, and there's so much hope coming from you. How have you been able to get over, or if you ever did have any resentment that so many people let this happen? How are you not resentful to the people that let this happen, or that it happened in history? Because you seem so positive.
Well, the question was whether I have any resentment towards the people who caused all this. And that's a difficult question to answer because, you know, losing 40 members of my family, seeing and hearing the cries, having the deprivation, humiliation, and all that goes with that, and living in constant fear. And some of the scars are still with me. You know, it doesn't stop. It's just something that I have overcome because I'm not a victim anymore. And the positive aspect of this is that you realize that there's goodness in people as well as evil, and that my life has been given to me by the people who are good, and that my life is filled with miracles. Unfortunately, it hasn't happened to the rest of the 96% in Lithuania and the 6 million Jews and 5 million non-Jews, and 1.5 million children were murdered as well. So sometimes yes, sometimes no. I joined and participated in a German-Jewish dialogue group in Boston, where I came from. I live in Dallas now. And both the Germans and the Jews were grappling with this same issue. And it came in waves. Some days it was a good day, some days it wasn't. So thank you for bringing it back to me. Yes?
Over there.
How long did you stay with your rescuers when you went with them?
To repeat again.
The question is, how long did you stay with your rescuers?
Oh, through the war. Because I kept being shuffled back and forth to all of them. You know, it takes about between 7 to 12 rescuers to help a child. Some people were lucky and stayed with one. I don't know where this question came from, but I'm looking at everybody. The war started was over in 45, so I was like, yeah, I stayed with them because if I didn't stay with my rescuers, I'd be on the other side of life. They are the ones who allowed me to have life. So, thank you.
All the way in the back there, yes.
Okay. For those who were separated, how were families able to reunite? And in your case, how were you able to reunite with your parents?
Thank you. That was the good part. My good part. Well, for most of the children in Lithuania, it was not. As a matter of fact, the orphans were the norm. But my mother was able to escape after I did, and she was a very Aryan-looking person, and that was able to have a false identity and pretended to be a widow of somebody who was killed in the war, and she had jobs that she could take, but she had to keep going from one to the other. In Lithuania, it's a very small country. I mean, it could fit, I checked it out. It fits into Texas at 0.09 times. So it's very small. So people know each other. And if there's some stranger, it's dangerous. My father, who was interned both in the Kovno and in the Vilnius ghetto, Vilnius is the capital of Lithuania now, he decided that he was going to become a partisan, a fighter, because he's going to die fighting instead of just accepting that life can be taken away from him at the whim of anybody. So did anybody see the movie Defiance here? Ah, yeah. It was nominated for Oscars, it was nominated for the Golden Globe. And my father was in the same woods, and he did just that. He survived the war in great danger and deprivation, but survived the war. And we were reunited afterwards because we knew each other. The Red Cross did a great job in trying to reunite families afterwards. And we tried to locate ours, but nobody survived except one brother of my father.
Yes, over there. John, yes, you.
Okay. So if something like this, like the Holocaust, were to happen today in this time period, would you be happy and completely open to saving other people like your rescuers did for you?
I would like to say yes, but I'm 81 years old. I can't do very much. Spiritually, emotionally, intellectually, it's a yes. But you don't know what you're facing until you're facing it. And not all that's faced can be resolved either. So until the moment happens, I don't think any one of us can. I don't know, I can't speak for you actually. But in my case, I would have done it because I feel this enormous sense of gratitude for my life, which has been wonderful. Since I've come here, I've tried to give back as much as I can, as a matter of fact, both by volunteering and for 10 years I volunteered for Holocaust survivors. As a matter of fact, when I retired, the governor of Massachusetts gave me a citation, and so did the Senate. They gave me a standing ovation. It was like, and it felt like Cinderella. But and I also did a lot of good. For instance, I helped create a education bill for $10 million when Barney Frank was head of the Finance Committee. That education bill had lingered for like years in the Senate. He didn't even know about it. And then we got our 10 million. Of course, it's a drop in a bucket, but still, I've tried to do things that would help others and raise awareness and do commemoration of the victims, as well as help survivors, because we are very few left here. It's just, like Eric said, I'm one of the last of the generations that have witnessed this. And there's so many fictitious things happening, so, yeah.
You said you're 81 years old?
I sure am.
You look wonderful.
You just made my day. Thank you. Thank you.
Yes, over here.
Why do you feel like people choose to be in ignorant bliss and they like to just ignore the Holocaust, just leave it in history? Like you said in Iran, they make jokes about it. Why do people do that? Because my opinion, it doesn't make any sense.
Yeah.
Could you repeat the question?
Yes, he was wondering what I was wondering about also. Why, why do people like deny the Holocaust? What's the whole idea of this? It just doesn't make any sense to either of us. But you know, it's political. It is goes into people's agendas, organizations, governance. It is ingrained in some of the background of Jew hating. That is also something I do not understand. And there's a huge resentment that the Holocaust is different than the others. But it is different. The Holocaust is unique. It was almost like when, let's say, a Rwandan was targeted for murder, they wouldn't follow him across the borders of different countries. But Jews were persecuted all over, wherever they are, whoever they are, and with no regard to who they were. But there's no sense in rewriting history. I mean, the history that is here about the Holocaust has been mostly written by Germans because they kept such good records. So how do we explain that? We'll leave that with a question mark.
Why do we do? Go ahead, yes, ma'am. Yes.
6 years old and even 12 years old is like really young. At what age do you believe that you like understood the severity of your situation, of just the Holocaust in general?
The question was that I was very young, and I agree. And what is my situation with the Holocaust? I didn't get.
When did people like figure out the severity of
Well, when I saw people being killed, and I knew that I couldn't be with my parents. I mean, I was being targeted for murder because I was a Jew, and I didn't know what I did to deserve it. I was just a little child. I was trying to be a good girl so I wouldn't be murdered, right? I mean, that doesn't make any sense. So, yeah, it's not something that children can understand. They can understand that one has to be quiet when understand that one is persecuted, but the reason for that is unfathomable. And you can understand that there's something really bad about you because they want you for murder. And that is something that stays with people in the trauma of Holocaust survivors, that some people feel guilty that they were not murdered, and some people feel bad that they have been persecuted for being Jewish, so that must be something bad. And then there's some people that say, yeah, it just didn't exist. I had blocked out my whole childhood till the year 2000 because I couldn't face it. And then I went back to Lithuania and I retraced my steps. And that was, shall we say, an emotional roller coaster. Some of the people I knew were still alive then in 2000. And I'm still in touch with one of the people who were hiding with me. But, I decided I can't live with a childhood that didn't exist just because I didn't want to face it. It's almost like to say you cut off your arm because it doesn't do what you want, and then you're not whole again. So you have to be as whole as possible. And that was one of my intentions. So, yeah. I hope I answered your question. I've digressed. Yeah.
Austin, you're next.
How was it? I'm sorry to ask this question. You kind of answered in your last answer, but how did it affect you when you did try to bring it up for the year 2000? I'm very sorry.
Thank you. The question was, how did it affect me when I went back and had to face all this? And that's what made me decide to be who I am more than anything else. On one side, it opened a Pandora's box, kind of where all the emotions started flowing, and I was that child again instead of the grown-up, trying to decide who I am as an individual. And on the other hand, I realized that I had learned so much from this, who I am, by just going back and having the courage to face it. There are certain things in Holocaust survivors that seem to have a common denominator as far as their memories go, and that is fear, trauma, and trust. Those are the major ones for me anyway. So I went to a convention once of people, the first one that child survivors got together on, and we had workshops, and it was like everybody seemed to have the same issues. Like, how is that possible? We're all individuals, right? So that opened my eyes that there's a certain kind of history involved that nobody can share except with each other when they're Holocaust survivors. It's not like being in an abusive family. It's a different kind of trauma that was sponsored by a government that was from one of the most cultured countries in Europe, that was not meant to have an ideology necessarily, and was implemented in many sadistic ways that had nothing to do with it. You know. So, did I answer you? Okay. Okay. Hi. Just.
My father lost everything. He was very wealthy, also lost it all. And then the communists, when they became reigned in Hungary, also lost it all. So I need to know how your father handled after the war. Tell us what happened after the war with him. How did he pick himself back up with finding work, getting his businesses back, etc.?
The question was, how did my father reconstruct his financial life with after the war, when everything was lost, and how we were able to continue. But well, my father was a great businessman. We had nothing after the war, and he got himself in a position that the Russians didn't like because he was a Jew and he was too much in the foreground. So they even had a Politburo meeting about what to do with Paul, you know, Paul Rogansky. So we didn't wait for the results, we escaped. So when we escaped, we just had, you know, a backpack practically on our backs with false passports, and we really had nothing. I mean, we slept on floors, you know, it was, what happened to most Jews after the war is another chapter of history, because the refugee problem with Jews was different, because it wasn't like going from one country to another. It was going from one frying pot to the, what is it? From the pot to the frying pan, whatever it is. Something like that, that is American. So we traveled, we were in a DP camp in Austria. We were in a prison in Hungary. We arrived in Italy, where we lived for 6 years. And when we arrived there was a Jewish community that took people in who were like we were. And they gave us food, and they gave us a floor to sleep on. And that was about where we were in Italy in 1945. My parents didn't have money to keep me, and the Jews had something called a hakshara, which is like a commune for children who were orphaned or didn't have any ways to support themselves. And everybody was chipping in with each other. And that's the way I survived some of the first year. In 6 years, my father had again a chauffeur, and we had a housekeeper. So that was part of it. But then he decided to come to America because he wanted to be on a soil that didn't have any wars. And he said America would be the last place on earth to have a war, because if there was a war in America, it would be the last war on earth. He was a wise man. Yeah. So.
Yeah, good.
I don't remember if you said or not, but did you say how old you were when you were reunited with your family?
Yes, it was 1945. I was almost 10 years old. I had never gone to school. And yeah, that's about it. And we were not the same people anymore. Yeah.
Go ahead.
How in touch were you with your faith during this time? How did it affect you?
One more time.
How in touch with your faith were you during this time, and how did it affect your situation?
The first part.
Yeah, he's asking about your faith.
My
How about
faith.
your-
Oh. Well, that's kind of difficult. I have never spoken about that. Well, yeah, sometimes I do. I was born into a secular family, and when the Holocaust happened, my father could not understand how God could permit that. And so he became even more secular. And my faith is very strong because I speak to God directly, but I don't belong. I was baptized during the war because one of my rescuers didn't want to talk a lie. And that doesn't count very much because it was under duress. So in a way, I understand religions, but when I see religions, I want them to be different and just go to God rather than self-validation. And I see too much of that happening. But my spiritual life is very strong, if that's what you mean. Yeah. Thank you. It was hard for me.
How long did it take for you to tell your story? Like what age?
I didn't have a story. I didn't have a story until I went back to Lithuania. I didn't know who I was. I didn't know what happened. My parents spoke about it only to their friends who went through it as well. At this point, I've been like in books and movies and whatever, but I still don't feel, I don't have this kind of story that the people who actually went through the torture have. I went through physical and emotional hardships, but I didn't go through the tortures that some of the people had that were in other concentration camps, not the ghetto. And I didn't repeat your question. Did everybody hear it? No? Okay, too late now. Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Okay, how about over here? Yes. Yeah, you're next.
So how do you feel about today's situation with all the immigrants here in the U.S.? It's been compared to somewhat the Holocaust. It's nothing the same, but there's people that have compared it because of all the families that are being separated.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on that?
This is a question that is very difficult for Jews to answer.
Could you repeat it, please?
I'm a total failure at this, sorry. The question is about the contemporary refugee situation and how I feel about it because of my personal experiences. And the fact is that all the Jews have the same issue with that because the Talmud says if you save one life, you save the world, and we're commanded to do that. On the other hand, a lot of the enemies of the Jews are refugees also. So we don't know which life is being saved, which way, how. So the consensus is among Jews and among myself is, yes, we want the refugees to have a decent life if their life is endangered, because life is the most important thing in the Jewish religion. But the process of admittance has to be such that it's not suicidal for America or for the Jews.
I think we have time for 2 more questions before we want to transition
For what?
to pipers as well. Over here, Jesper.
Can you repeat the question? I can hear it. Sorry.
Found yourself after the war with interactions of communication with the former Nazi member?
Have you ever been in contact with a former Nazi member, a communication with a person like this? So the question was about if she's ever met anybody who was a former Nazi, or perhaps a Nazi still, and how did you react?
In the German-Jewish dialogue that I ran, there were some descendants of Nazis, but not Nazis themselves, or they didn't admit it. So I don't know. But my life's path has not taken me in that direction, so I have not. Sorry, but I'm glad to.
All the way in the back there, yes, I can only see the head.
I was wondering if, as generations get further and further away from the actual events of the Holocaust, there was something specific that you would like us to teach about it going forward.
Yes. I'd like you to teach about the sanctity. Oh, you go ahead.
Sorry.
Okay. The question was, what would I like to see all of you and you take back with you and teach the lesson from the Holocaust? And the first thing that comes to my mind is the sanctity of life everywhere and everyone. That when you look at that and you stop having prejudices and you stop not respecting the other because they're different, that is the first step in understanding, in compassion, in making us a better person as well as a better world. That's what comes to my mind now. Thank you.
Please, one more round of applause for Rosian Zerner.
So I come with the story that we have as Germans.
Und was gerade gesungen wurde, ist die Hymne von Israel, die Hatikva.
And what they were singing was Israel's national anthem, the Hatikva.
Und so was passiert ist, dass wir uns sehr intensiv beschäftigt haben mit der Geschichte unserer Familien.
And what happened is that we did intense research about our family's history and their stories.
Aber zuallererst fing das in unseren Herzen an.
But that started in our hearts.
Und als Gemeinde sind wir zusammengekommen und wir haben erstmal unsere Herzen anschauen müssen, den Nazi in uns.
And as a church, we had to come together and we had to look at the Nazis inside of ourselves first.
Wir haben unsere Härte anschauen müssen.
We had to look at the hardness that we had in our hearts,
Unsere Gleichgültigkeit.
our indifference,
Unser so verachtendes Denken von Schwächeren, Kranken.
we had to look at the way that we hated people who were weaker or who were sick.
Und das fing an, erstmal uns selber zu erschüttern, weil wir gemerkt haben, das ist in uns.
And this started to shake us because we realized this is inside of me.
So, ich hatte einen Opa, der war im Krieg,
One of my grandfathers was in the war,
aber mal zuzulassen, was in mir ist, das war, als ob ich einen Spiegel umdrehe und ich musste da reinschauen.
but actually looking at what's inside of myself was like turning this mirror around and I had to look at it.
Und das hat uns wirklich zerbrochen.
And this really broke us.
Und aus dem heraus fingen wir an, in unseren Familien nachzufragen, was war eigentlich wirklich.
And so we started asking in our families what happened back then.
Es gibt so die offiziellen Familiengeschichten in Deutschland.
There's always an official family story in Germany.
So von der einen Seite, da hat man immer erzählt, dein Opa konnte nicht in den Krieg gehen, weil er ein Lungenleiden hatte.
Yeah, there was always the one side of the story where you heard your grandpa, he couldn't go off to war because he had issues with his lungs.
Und das glaubt man dann.
And so we just believed it.
Und so in dieser Zeit von persönlicher Erschütterung
And so during this time of being shooken personally,
bekam ich auf einmal einen Anruf von meiner Mutter.
all of a sudden my mom gave me a call.
Und ihr Bruder war erst gestorben und seine Frau räumte seinen Schreibtisch auf.
Her brother had just died and his wife was cleaning off his desk.
Und auf einmal tauchte ein kleines Buch auf
And all of a sudden she discovers this little book.
über die Geschichte der Familie meiner Mutter.
And it tells the story of my mom's family.
Und auf einmal steht in diesem Buch drin, dass der Bruder meines Opas Bürgermeister in einem kleinen Städtchen in Deutschland war.
And all of a sudden we can read in this book that my grandpa's brother was a mayor in his little town in Germany.
Und in diesem Buch findest du einen Brief, den er an Hitler geschrieben hat.
And in this book you can see a letter that he wrote to Hitler himself.
Und er schrieb, wir sind die erste Stadt in Deutschland, die frei ist von Juden.
And he wrote, "We are the first city in Germany to be free of Jews.
Und wir möchten dich einladen, Ehrenbürger unserer Stadt zu werden.
And we would like to invite you and welcome you to be an honorary resident of our city."
Und Hitler schrieb ihm zurück.
And Hitler wrote back to him.
Und er war sehr erfreut über diese Nachricht, dass keine Juden mehr in der Stadt sind und nahm die Einladung als Ehrenbürger dankend an.
Hitler was very excited to receive this letter, and he was very pleased to hear that this city was free of Jews, and he accepted this position of being an honorary citizen of this town.
Und als ich das gehört habe, war ich wirklich geschockt.
And when I heard this, I was shocked.
Und dann fing ich an, meine Mutter zu fragen, und was hat dein Vater gemacht?
And so I started asking my mom, but what did your dad do?
Und in Deutschland, in Berlin gibt es ein großes Büro, da kannst du hinschreiben und alle Unterlagen, die noch irgendwie vom Krieg übrig sind dort gesammelt.
In Berlin, there's an office that you can write to, and all of the documents that were kept meticulously during the war, they can access them there, and so you can write to find out about your family's story.
So, und ich wusste von meinem Opa, dass er in einer Panzerfabrik gearbeitet hat.
And so I knew that my grandpa worked in a division where they were building tanks.
Und es gibt 2 Bilder von ihm im Fotoalbum.
And there are 2 pictures of him in our picture books, our
Das
photo
eine
albums.
ist in der Wehrmachtsuniform
And one of them is in his Wehrmacht, in his officer uniform.
und das andere ist in der schwarzen Totenkopfuniform.
And the other one is in this uniform from the SS soldiers.
Und so rief ich in diesem Büro an und habe gesagt, was hat es zu bedeuten?
And so I called this office and I said, "What does this mean?"
Und dann sagte sie, naja, er ist aufgestiegen und war dann ein SS-Aufseher in dieser Panzerfabrik.
And they said, yeah, he got a promotion and he got to work as an SS supervisor in this tank factory.
Ich las in einem Buch von einem Holocaust-Überlebenden,
I was reading in a book about a Holocaust survivor,
dass er in einer Panzerfabrik arbeiten musste.
and he had to work in a tank factory.
Und er beschrieb das, dass sie zu 8 diese ganz schweren Panzerketten zu 8 ausgehungert, ausgemerkelt tragen mussten.
And he wrote about how 8 of them would have to carry these huge chains for the tanks, and they were starving and so weak, but 8 of them had to carry one of those.
Und die SS-Aufseher, von denen mein Opa einer war,
And the SS officer, the supervisor, which my grandpa was one of them,
standen da mit Stöcken und haben das beobachtet.
they stood there with sticks and rods and were watching it.
Und wenn die je zusammengebrochen wären, dann hätten die draufgeschlagen.
And if one of them fell down, they started beating them.
Oder sie wären sowieso gestorben unter der Last.
Or they would have just died anyways because it was too difficult for them to carry.
Meine Mutter erzählte von ihrem Vater.
And so my mom shared about her father.
Manchmal kam er nach Hause
Sometimes he came home
und dann nahm er sie und fing an, auf sie zu schlagen.
and he took her and just started beating her.
Und sie fing an zu bluten.
And she started to bleed.
Und dann machte er kurz Stopp und sagte, weißt du, warum ich das mache?
And he said, "Do you know why I'm doing this?"
Und sie war 8 Jahre alt. Sie sagt, nein.
And she said, she was 8 years old. She said, "No, I don't."
Und so hat er einfach weitergemacht.
And so he just continued beating her.
Und wenn du das mit deinem eigenen Kind zu Hause machst, dann möchte ich nicht wirklich wissen, was in dieser Panzerfabrik.
Yeah, and so if you do this with your own child at home, I don't want to know what went on in that tank factory.
Und das waren auf einmal lauter Dinge, die ans Licht kamen.
And so these were things that just started coming to light.
Also bin ich zu meinem Vater gegangen.
So I went to my father.
Und bei meinem Vater war es ein bisschen schwieriger.
And with my father, it was a little bit more difficult.
Denn seine Geschichte ist, dass als er 9 Jahre alt war, haben seine Eltern sich scheiden lassen.
Because when he was 9 years old, his parents got divorced.
Und er hat von dem Zeitpunkt an seinen Vater nie wieder gesehen.
And after this point in time, he never saw his father again.
Aber er hatte noch zu einer Verwandten aus dieser Familie sehr lockeren Kontakt.
But he was still in touch with one of his relatives from this side of the family.
Und von ihm hat man gesagt, er war nicht im Krieg wegen diesem Lungenleiden.
And so they said, yeah, he wasn't at war because of the issues that he had with his lungs.
Und ich bin dann zu meinem Vater und habe gesagt, kannst du doch noch mal irgendwas rausfinden? Stimmt es? War das alles?
And so I went to my father and I asked him, is that all that there is? Can you not find out anything else?
Und so rief er diese Frau an. Das war eine sehr, sehr alte Frau, fast 90 Jahre alt.
And so he called this woman. It was a very elderly woman. She was almost 90 years old.
Und dann sagt er zu ihr, weißt du, was mein Vater im Krieg gemacht hat? Und sie war völlig überrascht und hat gesagt, was, du weißt es nicht?
And he asked her, do you know what my father did during the war? And she said, what? She was shocked. She said, you don't know what he did?
Und er sagte, ich habe keine Ahnung.
And he said, no, I don't have a clue.
Und dann erzählte sie ihm und sagte, dein Vater, der war ein Ingenieur.
And then she told him, your father was an engineer.
Und er hatte den Auftrag, in Auschwitz die ganze Elektrizität zu installieren.
And it was his job to install the electricity in Auschwitz.
Und das heißt, 16 Kilometer Stacheldrahtzaun aufzubauen.
And this means 60 kilometers, so we're talking about more than 120 miles, right? Conversion? Yeah, of barbed wire that he had to install.
Und Starkstrom draufzulegen.
And he had to put it under electricity.
Und weißt du, ich war in Auschwitz und ich habe mich da durchführen lassen.
And you know, I was in Auschwitz myself.
Und so die Frau, die die Führung machte, erzählte mir,
And so the lady that was our tour guide shared with me
dass Mütter, denen man ihre Kinder weggenommen hatte, weil Mengele seine Versuche machen wollte.
Children were taken away from their mothers because there was a doctor there, his name was Mengele, and he wanted to do experiments.
Wenn diese Mütter nach Wochen ihre Kinder wieder gesehen haben
And several weeks later, when these mothers saw their children again,
und wie furchtbar entstellt sie aussahen und wie zerstört ihre Körper waren,
and how they just looked completely destroyed,
dann haben sie sich in den Zaun geschmissen.
they ran and threw themselves against this fence
Sie haben das nicht ausgehalten.
because they couldn't bear it.
Den Zaun, den mein Opa aufgerichtet hat.
This fence that my grandfather built.
Und das ist, wenn ich nach Auschwitz gehe, das ist wie ein Denkmal, was mein Opa gesetzt hat.
And whenever I go to Auschwitz, this is for me a memorial of what my grandfather caused.
Und so rief mein Vater nochmal diese alten Frau an und hat gesagt, gibt es noch mehr, was ich wissen sollte?
And so my father called this woman again and said, is there more that I need to know?
Und dann hat sie die restliche Wahrheit erzählt.
And then she shared the rest of the truth.
Und dann sagte sie, dein Vater hat auch mitgeholfen, die Leitungen in den Gaskammern zu verlegen.
And then she said, your father helped install the pipes in the gas chambers.
Und das heißt, er hat mitgeholfen, die Plattform zu schaffen für den Tod von Hunderttausenden von Juden.
That means he helped create the platform for hundreds of thousands of Jews to die.
Und das hat mich natürlich sehr erschüttert.
And this shocked me.
Und ich bin so dankbar, Freunde zu haben wie Rosalie.
I am so grateful to have friends like Rosalie.
So, hier stehe ich mit einem Großvater, der mitgeholfen hat, Auschwitz aufzubauen.
I am standing here today with a grandfather who helped build Auschwitz.
Rosalie hat ihre Familie in Auschwitz verloren.
Rosalie lost her family in Auschwitz.
Und deswegen ist das, was wir heute hier machen, es ist so wichtig,
That's why what we are doing today is so important.
zu hören von Rosian.
To hear from Rosian,
Vielen, vielen Dank.
thank you so much.
Und deswegen, was wir machen als Gemeinde mit dem Marsch des Lebens,
That's why what we are doing with the March of Life as a church,
wir laufen die Routen ab, die zum Schluss vom Krieg, als die ganzen KZs geleert wurden und ausgemergelte halbe Leichen auf den Straßen liefen.
we walk along the same pathways where after the concentration camps were emptied where they were being emptied towards the end of the war, and these people who were starving to death, they were practically corpses, and they were forced to walk along these pathways.
Und wir machen das und versuchen aus diesen Todesmärschen Märsche des Lebens zu machen.
We try to create pathways of life out of these pathways of death and these death march routes.
Und dann laufen Nazi-Nachfahren und Holocaust-Überlebenden Seite an Seite auf diesen Wegen.
And so you have descendants of Nazis and descendants of Holocaust survivors walking side by side on these paths.
Und es ist unglaublich, was dann passiert.
And it's incredible, unbelievable to see what happens.
Und wir müssen daran erinnern und gedenken, was passiert ist.
And so we need to remember what happened.
Und wir müssen das unseren Kindern weitergeben.
We need to pass it on to our children.
Und wir müssen die Worte finden, die unsere Großväter nie ausgesprochen haben.
And we need to find the words that our grandfathers never spoke.
Mein Großvater hat nie gesagt, es tut mir leid für das, was ich gemacht habe.
My grandfather never said that he was sorry for what happened.
Und Rosian, ich möchte dir das sagen, dass mir das sehr, sehr leid tut, was wir als Deutsche dir angetan haben und deine Familie. Du hast 40 Angehörige verloren.
Rosie, and I would like to apologize to you for what my family did to you. You lost 40 members of your family, and I would like to ask you for forgiveness on behalf of my family.
Aber ich möchte das aussprechen und diese Worte finden.
I would like to speak this out for you. Thank you.
Es ist so wichtig, von ihnen zu hören,
It is so important to hear from them
von der zweiten Generation zu hören, von der dritten Generation.
and to hear from the second and the third generations.
Und wir dürfen damit nie aufhören,
And we can never stop
weil das Trauma, was sie erlebt haben,
because the trauma that they experience,
das ist in den Kindern,
it's in their children,
das ist in den Enkeln
it's in their grandchildren,
und wir müssen das aussprechen.
and we need to speak it out.
Wir müssen sie ehren und es weitergeben.
And we need to honor them and pass this on.
So, ich möchte meine Tochter bitten, nach vorne zu kommen.
I would like to ask my daughter to come up to the front.
Vielen Dank, dass ich hier sein darf. Es ist für mich eine Ehre.
Thank you for allowing me to be here. It's truly an honor for me.
Ich möchte auch euch danken, dass ihr hierher gekommen seid.
I would like to thank you for coming tonight as well.
Und wie meine Mutter schon erzählt hat, fing unsere Gemeinde an, in ihren Familien zu recherchieren.
And as my mother shared, our church started to do research about their families.
So, ich bin damit aufgewachsen mit dem Marsch des Lebens.
And so I grew up with the March of Life.
Und für mich war es irgendwie normal.
And for me, that was normal.
Und in der Bibel steht, dass Gott die Schuld der Vorfahren bis in die 3. und 4. Generation heimsucht.
And in the Bible, we read that God remembers the sin to the 3rd and 4th generation.
Und ich bin die 4. Generation.
And I'm the 4th generation.
Aber ich konnte irgendwie nie damit was anfangen, was mein Urgroßvater oder meine Urgroßväter gemacht haben.
But I didn't know what to do with the fact of what my grandfather and great-grandfathers did.
Ich dachte, ich kann nichts dafür, was die getan haben. Das ist nicht meine Schuld.
I thought, it's not my fault. It doesn't have anything to do with me.
Warum habe ich was damit zu tun?
Why does it have anything to do with me at all?
Und ich habe mich an eine Situation erinnert, da war ich 4 Jahre alt.
And I remembered a situation when I was 4 years old.
Und ich saß im Auto mit meiner Mutter.
And I was sitting in the car with my mom.
Und plötzlich sagte ich, alle Juden müssen sterben.
And all of a sudden I said, all of the Jews have to die.
Ich wusste nicht, wer waren Juden. Ich wusste auch nichts vom Zweiten Weltkrieg.
I didn't even know who the Jews were. I didn't know anything about the Second World War.
Ich war erst 4 Jahre alt.
I was only 4 years old.
Und meine Eltern waren sehr geschockt darüber, was ich gesagt habe.
And my parents were horrified at what I had said.
Ich habe überhaupt nicht verstanden, was ich gesagt habe. Es kam einfach raus.
I didn't even understand what I was saying. It just came out of me.
Und meine Eltern haben mir dann ein bisschen versucht zu erklären, was das überhaupt heißt.
And then my parents tried to explain to me what it meant.
Und als ich mich an diese Situation erinnert habe, da habe ich gemerkt, genau diesen Satz haben die Nazis damals auch gesagt.
And when I remembered the sentence, I realized the Nazis said this same thing.
Mit großer Wahrscheinlichkeit auch meine Urgroßväter.
And my great-grandparents probably said the same thing as well.
Und dann habe ich verstanden, dass es wichtig ist, dass ich nicht nur schaue, was meine Vorfahren gemacht haben, sondern auch zu schauen, was für ein Potenzial in mir davon noch ist.
And then I realized it's not only important to look to see what my forefathers did, but also to realize that this also has a potential to live on inside of me.
So, ich als 4. Generation, das ist total wichtig, das zu machen, zu erinnern, aber genauso auch weiterzugeben, zu erzählen.
So as the 4th generation, it's very important to remember, but even so to continue to speak about it.
Und so wie Rosian gesagt hat, gibt es noch viel Antisemitismus heutzutage.
And as Rosian said, there's a lot of anti-Semitism nowadays.
Obwohl der Holocaust eigentlich uns eine Warnung, eine Lehre sein sollte.
Even though that the Holocaust should be a warning for us.
Und deswegen ist es so wichtig, dass wir das hier machen, damit sowas nie wieder passieren darf.
And that's why it's so important for us to do something so that it will never happen again. Thank you.
So I just talked to presenters and they said they would be happy to answer a few questions as well. Yes, ma'am.
I'm sorry for asking this, but is it true that the German soldiers were pressured and socially ridiculed to be
Dass die Deutschen
participate in
dass die deutschen Soldaten dazu gezwungen worden sind, am Holocaust teilzunehmen. Sie haben ihre Jobs verloren. Okay. So if I understood that correctly, you're asking if the Germans were forced to participate in the Holocaust, basically. So ob sie dazu gezwungen waren, am Holocaust teilzunehmen, die deutschen Soldaten.
Ja. Also, ich sag das eben. Deutschland war über Jahre so beeinflusst von Hitler und seiner ganzen Ideologie.
Germany had been so influenced by Hitler for so many years and with his entire ideology.
Dass es eigentlich für sie das Größte war, im Krieg mitzumachen.
So for them it was the greatest thing that they could do to take part in this war.
Und es waren ganz wenige, die gezwungenermaßen
And there
Krieg gezwungen.
were only a few who were actually forced to be involved with the war.
Aber die Deutschen waren so beeinflusst von dieser ganzen
The
Ideologie,
Germans were already so influenced by this ideology
dass sie mit wirklich wehenden Fahnen in den Krieg gezogen
that they were
sind.
running with flags flying and everything and were happy to go to war. Mhm.
Anybody else? Yes.
Did your family get once others found out, did they actually get made fun of, I guess, in a way, or did you as a child were you picked on for being a part of not being a part of having that in your family in the past?
Haben Leute euch runtergemacht dafür, dass das in eurer Familie war? In der Vergangenheit? So, yeah. So the question was if people made fun of their family, ridiculed them for what their grandparents and great-grandparents had done during the war.
Also wir wurden nicht deswegen runtergemacht, sondern es war, die Leute waren beeindruckt, dass wir von dem erzählen, auch aufgrund dessen, weil es eben schlimm ist.
They weren't ridiculed, but people were shocked that they were actually talking about it because of how terrible it is.
Und bis heute reden die deutschen Familien nicht darüber. Das ist
Even today, German families don't talk about what happened. It's actually very rare that they've opened up.
Anybody else? Yes.
The daughter.
Mm-hmm.
In a
a world today where there's Holocaust deniers and or on the flip side of that, there's people who take it to the extreme and are neo-Nazi, how would you and what would you say to someone that would tell you as a younger person of our like age something that, in my opinion, that crazy, like this didn't happen, or I believe in what Hitler stood for. How do you address that as someone in your position?
In einer Welt, wo wir Neonazis haben, aber auch Holocaust-Verleumdung, wie würdest du darauf reagieren, wenn jemand auf dich zukommen würde und sagen würde, der Holocaust hat nicht stattgefunden? Was würdest du zu der Person sagen? So the question is, in the world today, where we have people denying the Holocaust, but also neo-Nazis on both sides, how would you respond if someone were to approach you and to say the Holocaust never happened?
Also einerseits kann ich das gar nicht nachvollziehen, weil es gibt so viele, also nicht mehr viele, aber es gibt natürlich auch Holocaust-Überlebende, so wie Rosian, aber genauso wir als Nachfahren von Nazis haben Zeugnis und es gibt so viele Beweise dafür, dass es gegeben, also dass es den Holocaust gab.
I would say that there's just so much proof of the Holocaust. You see both sides where we as descendants of the perpetrators have proof of what they did, and also the descendants and also the victims of the Holocaust, alone with what they experienced.
Allein schon Auschwitz ist ein Beweis dafür, dass es den Holocaust gegeben haben muss.
Even just if you look at Auschwitz, you see proof that the Holocaust is and was real. Mm-hmm.
Yes.
After learning about your family, how long did it take you to start bringing awareness?
Nachdem ihr das erfahren habt mit der Familie, wie lange hat es gedauert, bis ihr angefangen habt, Leute darauf aufmerksam zu machen, so Awareness zu verbreiten?
Das Ganze hat 2002 angefangen.
Mm-hmm. So the question was, after they experienced or found this out with their family, how long it took for them to start spreading awareness, correct? Yes. So it started in 2002. Mm-hmm.
Seit 2002 haben wir angefangen, uns intensiv damit zu beschäftigen. Und 2007 hat der erste Marsch des Lebens gestartet, wo wir nach außen gegangen sind.
So in 2002, they really started looking into their families, histories themselves, and then in 2007 was the first March of Life. And you know that the March of Life is called March of Remembrance here in the US. It's the same movement. Okay.
We have time for one more question. Who would like to have the last question? Yes.
With having your family's history, have you ever experienced a Jew show anger towards you because you share that same blood?
Mit der Geschichte eurer Familie habt ihr schon mal erlebt, dass ein Jude auf euch sauer war? To repeat the question, with your family's history, have you ever experienced a Jewish person being upset with you, being angry with you?
Kurz bevor mein Vater starb, mit 85 Jahren.
Right before my father died when he was 85,
Ist nach Israel gereist.
he went to Israel
Zu den Holocaust-Überlebenden.
to the Holocaust survivors there.
Und hat seine Geschichte von seinem Vater erzählt.
And so he shared his father's story.
Und hat Vergebung gebeten.
And he asked for forgiveness.
Und was verständlich ist, eine Holocaust-Überlebende stand auf und hat gesagt, wir werden das nie vergeben, was ich auch wirklich verstehe.
And it's completely understandable. One of the Holocaust survivors stood up and said, "We will never forgive you." And I completely understand this.
Aber was dann passiert ist, alle anderen Holocaust-Überlebenden standen auch auf.
But what happened is that all the other Holocaust survivors got up.
Und haben auf einmal zu ihr gesagt, nein, wir vergeben ihm.
And they start saying, "No, we will forgive him."
Das ist unglaublich.
And so that's unbelievable.
Und dann sind sie nach vorne gegangen. Mein Vater saß zu der Zeit schon im Rollstuhl, als er so schwach war.
And so they went up towards the front, towards my father, who was already in a wheelchair because he was so weak at this point.
Und haben ihn umarmt und haben ihn geküsst.
And they just hugged him and kissed him.
Aber wir haben das aber einmal erlebt, sonst ist es unglaublich, dass wenn jemand seine Familie verloren hat, was wir gemacht haben, und diese Leute sagen, wir vergeben euch, es ist nicht zu fassen.
And so we experienced this one time, but just experiencing that when we ask them for forgiveness and they forgive us, it's unbelievable. Very remarkable. Mm-hmm.
So basically, to conclude, I would like to thank you all for coming out tonight. I would like to thank our presenters, Ansett, Werl, and of course Rosian as well, for being here, for telling you a powerful story. And I hope I see many of you at the March of Remembrance as well. It is this Saturday. And if you would like to sign up. We have sign-up sheets and free t-shirts for you as well. So please, if you're interested, come by the front door at the end. And otherwise, thank you so much, and please, one more round of applause.